Okay, good morning and welcome to Functional Skills English Week 17. This is a revision workshop for the writing assessments that are taking place next week. So as normal, you would have a lovely set of 5-a-day warm-up questions. Have a go at these in your head or on pen and paper, and maybe pause the video now to give you a chance to do that. Give yourself no more than 5 minutes. We are going to quickly run through them in just a moment. So if you are ready, let's have a look. What does IPPPC stand for? IPPPC is the underlying structure that we use within our writing. Each of the letters stands for a section or part that we need in our texts. So I stands for introduction, each P stands for paragraph, and C stands for conclusion. And we'll talk more about this in a little while. For questions 2 and 3, we're going to discuss these further on in the session, so hold on to your ideas and answers. We'll go through them together very soon. When we talk about question 4, so features of layout, other than your IPPPC structure, there are a few added extras that we would expect to see in your writing. And these include a heading at the top of the page to tell us what you are going to be talking about. And at the other end of your text, we would also expect to see the name of the writer, so the author, usually just the first name for online safety purposes. And we would also expect to see some kind of rating. That could be a pictorial version such as stars, or it could be a number score and might even be incorporated into your conclusion, but we tend to see it towards the end of the text. And this is just a very general overall kind of opinion about whatever it is that you are reviewing. And it is essential to reviews. It's something that we don't really see in any other kind of text, and we should be incorporating them into our work. Last but not least then, alternative words for positive. We're talking about a positive mood or attitude. We might use words like cheerful or happy. But if we're talking about sort of, that we're 100% sure about something, so we might say, I'm positive, or use words like definite to replace it. So that's just a very quick overview of the 5-a-day. What we're doing this week, we are having a revision kind of workshop kind of session linked to your writing skills. So there are things that we are doing really, really well at the moment, but there are still some things that we need to cover. We've got assessments coming up next week, and we want you to have as good a chance as possible at these. So we're going to just talk about some of the common pitfalls and some of the things that do hold people back in their writing across a range of levels. That's what our focus is on today. So the first thing we're going to do, you're going to sort of spend a bit of time thinking about what areas we struggle with a little bit. We're going to build up some of those skills in different areas. And then hopefully at the end of today, you can sort of reflect a little bit and you can think about, are there any areas you're still a little bit uncomfortable with? Have we improved? What you feel you personally need to work on and focus on for your exams in the future? So the first thing that I would like you to do is to open up the starter quiz. This is in the folder on Learn. There are 14 questions. Most of them are multiple choice. Have a go at answering the questions in the middle box, and to the right-hand side, you will probably see some columns that say red, amber, and green. Once you've had a go at the question, it is a good idea to have a think and be honest with yourselves. Did you find that easy, okay, or difficult? If you found the question quite difficult, put a cross in the box under red. If you found it was okay, put a cross in the box for amber. And if you found it really easy, put a cross in the box for green. Okay, and this is going to help us to think about what areas you're finding easy and what areas you're finding more of a struggle and that perhaps we need to do some work on. So pause the video now and please have a go at the starter quiz. If you've done with the starter quiz, please mark your answers using the answers that you see on the screen now. And again, this will be a point for you to reflect and see how well you got on and if there are any further areas that perhaps we need to do a little bit more work on. So, as I said, the focus of today is on your writing skills. We're going to kick it off with some of the basics in terms of punctuation, but this is really going to help boost your marks. And I'm going to try and put it into context and explain where it might become a bit of an issue. So, we all know that we need capital letters with every sentence, okay, at the start of every sentence, but there are a lot of other situations where we need them as well. What we need to kind of get into our heads, what we need to remember is the sort of situation. Am I being specific about something or am I being very general? So when I'm talking about people and places and objects and things, sometimes I use very generalized words such as car, table, chair. If I'm using those very generalized words, I don't need a capital. But if I'm talking about the specific name of something, I do need a capital. So again, look at car. Let's think of that as an example. The car, a car in the street, doesn't need a capital. But if I'm talking about the specific make and model, like Ford Fiesta, that would require capital letters because it's the specific name for that car. So a lot of these things, they fall into that category. Names of people, names of places such as companies, businesses, and so on. It's their specific name, so they need a capital letter. Holidays and events such as Christmas, Easter, Halloween, which we've had recently, and Remembrance Day, they all get capital letters as well. Days of the week and months of the year, because we're being specific on which day or which month, they get a capital letter as well. We do also need to be aware and remember, if we're talking about ourselves, we need a capital I. It stands in place of our name, so it is incredibly important that we give it a capital letter, whether it's at the start of the sentence or not. Again, things like languages and nationalities, well, we give a capital letter to the name of a country, so we should also give the capital letter to the name of the language or nationality that is linked to that country as well. So, for instance, if we said France, the country France gets a capital F, but the language, the nationality of French also gets a capital F. Sometimes as well, we shorten things down. If we're being lazy, we don't want to write things out in full, we pinch the first letter from each word and we push them together, such as United Kingdom, UK. National Health Service, NHS. We even do it with the name of our college, don't we? College of West Anglia, CWA. And if we do that, we need to use capitals for those as well. Let's also just briefly think about end of sentence punctuation, and then there's a couple of things that we're going to have a go at. So we thought about the capitals. When we get to the other end of the sentence, there's 3 pieces of punctuation that we can use to finish a sentence. If we're showing surprise or shock or strong emotion, we would use this lovely one over here, the exclamation mark. If we are asking for information, if we are, trying to find out something that we want to know, we would use the lovely question mark. And that would also be used for rhetorical questions as well. But if we're not in either of those situations, we use the full stop. Okay. All of those clearly end a sentence. We tend to use the full stop more than anything else, but they are the only things that can end a sentence. And what I often see with students is that they stick a comma on the end of a really good sentence and they carry on going. But the comma does not stop that sentence. It just joins it on to the next part. And a lot of the time, it doesn't join it on properly either. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So, what I would like you to do now, just going to stop sharing that for a moment. When you go on to Learn and you open up the folder, there is a document in the folder where you got this video from, and it says links to quizzes for this week. When you open it up, it will look something like this. The first quiz that I want you to do is this one here, where it says end of sentence punctuation, Kahoot. This is a quick quiz just to get you thinking about that end of sentence punctuation. So please pause the video now, open up that document and have a go at that quiz. Once you've had a go at that quiz, we're going to start putting the full stops, the capital letters into context. Okay, I'm going to help you with this. We're going to make it make a little bit more sense. So where we have one of the major issues in terms of students writing is not so much the capital letters. What we often find is that sentences are blurring and merging into each other. They're not clearly separated. Or students are just putting commas at the end of sentences and gluing them into a gigantic long sentence that is not properly constructed. So if we let's look at the first paragraph here on this example. Have a scan through for me. Have a think. Where do we need capital letters and where do we need full stops? I'll give you a moment now, pause the video, have a look. Okay. So again, for the most part, students are pretty confident with the capital side of things. You may have noticed that we've got a lowercase I. We need to put a capital for the name of the city, Edinburgh, and for the name of the person, Oliver. Again, the start of a sentence here. And even the name of this university here, all of these parts would get capital letters. English, being a language, would get a capital letter as well. Scotland, being a country, would get a capital letter as well. However, at the moment, we've got two really long sentences, and actually, they're too long. And within them, we've got smaller sentences that would work and would make sense on their own. So we need to think about that. We need to edit that. If I read out that first sentence to you, it might help you to to hear it and see where we need to break things up. My name is Anna. I live in Edinburgh with my partner Charlie and our son Oliver. There's a lot there. There's two separate bits, if you like. We actually need to stick a full stop in here at the end of my name is Anna. My name is Anna works as one piece of information. It makes sense on its own. It doesn't need to carry on. Again, let's look at the next bit from there. I live in Edinburgh with my partner Charlie and our son Oliver. That also works as a sentence on its own. It makes sense. It doesn't need anything more to complete it. That's a lot better just by putting in that full stop. Let's read the next bit, and just to really emphasize this. I met Charlie when we both studied at the University of East Anglia. He studied English literature and I studied engineering. We moved to Scotland after we graduated looking for work. Again, a really long sentence, and actually this needs breaking down. Okay, when you look through your work, it is very easy to forget when we're trying to get all the ideas in our head out onto the paper. It's so easy to forget to stop and pause and put those full stops in and break these sentences down clearly. So we need to train ourselves. We need to get into good habits of going back and proofreading. So it might help to hear it out loud. Think where you get to the end of a piece of information. Where is it complete? Where have you got across your complete piece of information or idea? So for instance, I met Charlie when we both studied at the University of East Anglia. That works, doesn't it? It's a full piece of information. I can put my full stop in there and kick off the next sentence with a capital letter. He studied English literature and I studied engineering. Again, one piece of information there as such, talking about what they studied. We don't need to glue it onto this bit about Scotland. Let's put a full stop in there and a capital letter here. We moved to Scotland after we graduated looking for work. That also now makes a bit more sense, that it's not glued onto everything else. So what we need to do, we need to be careful. We need to be proofreading in this way. This task is in the Learn folder, this text that you see here. So please open that up now and have a go looking at paragraph 2 and paragraph 3, practicing scanning through, thinking about where we need those capital letters and the full stops. I'll let you pause the video now. Okay, so we're going to move on now. We've talked about what we need at the start and the end of a sentence, and now we really do need to be thinking about how we're going to structure it within the sentence, from that capital letter to the full stop. And there are 3 kinds of sentences that we kind of think about and talk about in English. And when we want to extend a sentence, when we go beyond that basic simple sentence, there are 2 sort of routes that we can go down. When you open up the PowerPoint, there is a video link here to someone called Vicky Maxted who explains it in a very clear way. We did look at this in week 15, so I'm not going to play this for you now, but if you want a reminder, you can click on the link here to see that again. So I'm going to talk us through and kind of put some things into perspective. We are going to focus on this sentence here first, and this is what we would call a compound sentence. What we need to think about when we look at our sentences, when we are going for those bigger sentences and we are extending them, we need to think about the parts that we are joining together. And in this situation, we've got 2 small bits that would work on their own. Like we just looked at in that short text, we don't want them to just sit side by side on the line. We can't leave them sitting there with nothing. So if we don't want to separate them into small sentences and we want to physically join them together to make a longer sentence, this is the route that we need to go down. A lot of people do nothing but putting a comma in the middle. And we can't do that. We can't, if we have these 2 parts and they make sense on their own as little sentences, we cannot just glue them together with a comma. That is called a comma splice, and it's something those examiners hate. We need to avoid this. What we need to do instead, we need to use a joining word. Okay, a conjunction is its technical name. There are all sorts of joining words that you could use. Things like for, and, but, because, yet, so, or, as, also. All of those kinds of words work to join together these 2 parts and show how they link to each other. Another thing we often see, some students, they're really good at their joining words, but they forget to then put the comma as well. So we do actually need to have both for it to work properly. We cannot have a comma on its own. We cannot have a joining word on its own. We need a comma and a joining word for this to properly work and properly go together. So for a compound sentence, this kind, where we've got the 2 bits, they make sense as tiny sentences on their own. We glue them together with a comma and a joining word. Let's look at the next kind. So another route we can go down, and this will depend on the parts you are trying to join, remember. If we are in a slightly different situation where the 2 parts that we have don't actually work as 2 separate sentences, we've got to go a slightly different way. So what we sometimes find is that we have got a main sentence. This makes sense on its own. If I break it away, it works as a little sentence on its own. But the other part that I'm trying to join, sometimes it doesn't make sense on its own as a little sentence. If I said to you, although it was late, it doesn't sound finished, does it? It's because of that word although. It sounds like there is more information to come. It doesn't sound finished. So if we broke that off, we couldn't have that as a sentence on its own with a full stop at the end. It just doesn't make sense on its own. So if we want to join that, let's think of that as extra information. If we want to join that onto our main bit that we've got over here, This time we can use a comma. We use a comma to show where that extra information joins onto the main bit. And what you may have noticed, the word although, that's actually a joining word. It's not in the middle, but we have technically still got a joining word in there. Okay, so this time, because the joining word is over here, we can get away with just having a comma here in the middle to show where the extra information joins onto the main bit. And sometimes we might play around with that. We might move that extra information around. It doesn't always have to come first. But if you notice, let's get rid of those. If we look at this next one down, if you notice that by putting the extra information here, we've actually copied what we do up here with the compound sentence. We've got a bit that makes sense here. We've got a comma and a joining word in the middle. And then we've got another chunk here that we've joined on. It does have a pattern to it, doesn't it? We've got the joining word and the comma still, but in a slightly different place. Sometimes, not every time, but sometimes we find that the extra information can actually go in the middle of our sentence. And if that is the case, we just need a comma at the start and a comma at the end to show where that extra information goes. It's a bit like brackets, really, isn't it? It shows where that information starts and ends within the wider sentence. So we do just need to be very, very aware of that. Let's clear and get rid of that for a moment. Oh, no, I'm still drawing. Right, there we go. Okay. Couple of other situations that we might just want to think about in terms of commas as well. We don't do it often, but sometimes we do write a list. If we are writing a list of different items, we need a comma to separate each item in the list except for the last two items. That's because we have the word and it does that job for us. So we don't need a comma as well. That would be like overkill. So and separates the last two things. Sometimes we might use or instead of and if we're showing options. But we do need a comma in between each item in our list. Sometimes we might add extra words or information, perhaps at the start of a sentence, for instance, or even people's names. So things like yes, however, although, sometimes we use those odd words at the start of a sentence, or personally, things like that. We can use a comma. And again, when we use someone's name, we tend to use a comma as well. So bearing that in mind, I'd like you to now stop looking at the video. And what you're going to do, you're going to go back to that document that's got the links to quizzes. And what you will see here, I'm just highlighting on the screen, depending on your level, we've got entry level and level 1 and level 2 options for each quiz. We've got a quiz about commas and we've got a quiz about sentence structure to help get you to recognise those different situations where we're joining the different parts and what bits should work with others. It will help you to practice proofreading on that front. So please pause the video now and have a go at those two quizzes for me. Okay, I'm wary that time is getting on. So we're going to have a very quick talk about text layout and structure. Generally speaking, so we mentioned this in the 5 a day, the general kind of layout that we have underneath are, I'm not sure if that's working, sorry guys. Bear with me. The general structure that we have underneath our overall layout is that introduction, paragraph, and conclusion pattern. Introductions and conclusions tend to be 1 or 2 sentences long. They don't need to be a full-on, mega paragraph. It's the main sort of paragraphs where we want to build up our points. We need to make sure that each section is clearly separated from each other. We start a new paragraph when we're talking about a new point or idea. So several weeks ago, we did look at letter layout. Just a brief overview for you. You are the most important person, so you go first. Sender's address first, followed by the date. The date needs to be in full, so that means you write the month as the word. Then it's followed by the recipient's address. So that's the person that you are sending it to. If they are asking you to write a letter, the likelihood is that they are going to give you the address and the name of the person you are writing to. When we need to put in something to say hello, so we call that a greeting. If we know their name, we use it. So, dear Bob Smith, or whoever we're writing to. If we don't know their name, dear sir or madam, or to whom it may concern, are both equally polite and formal. You can include a subject line, which is a quick way of showing what the letter is going to be about, but it isn't essential because you already kind of do that in your introduction. You already explain why you're writing in that part, so you don't need to double up. The main body follows that IPPPC structure, and at the end, we need some way of saying goodbye before we put our name. So if we used their name at the start in the greeting, we use yours sincerely to say goodbye. If we don't know their name, we would use yours faithfully. They are words that the examiners would expect you to know how to spell. So if you're feeling wobbly on those, please practice and double check them. Email layout is very similar to a letter layout. On an exam paper or even on an online program, they tend to have this sort of template along the top that shows us the sort of boxes that we would expect to see in an email. They often fill them in for you, but if they don't leave them blank. Okay, you can make up email addresses. They won't give you a CC, BCC box. That's just something that we would see in real life, where we copy in extra people if they need to see the information. They would expect you to provide some kind of subject line, so a quick overview, a bit like a heading, of what the email is going to talk about. You can put a date in an email, but it isn't necessary. It's entirely up to you. If that's the way you've been taught to write emails before, you can include it. And from there, it follows the same pattern as a letter. From the greeting, so the dear part, down to the bottom, we follow the same pattern as a letter. When we say goodbye in an email, you can use sincerely like we did in a letter. However, there are some more typical ones that we would expect to see, such as kind regards or many thanks. We use those more often in emails than we do letters, and they're both very polite and work in formal and informal situations alike. Reports, this is something that we did quite a while ago. I think this was back in week 11, so before half term. Reports come in all shapes and sizes, but in terms of what you need to do, you would need some kind of heading or title to show what your report is about. If there are any boxes, so it's set up a bit like a form, if there are any boxes, fill them in with relevant information. It might be things like the date and the time of an event. It might be contact details, but you can make those things up. Remember, a report is about something that has already happened. So the kinds of things that you're going to discuss and talk about are linked to the who, where, what, when, why, and how of the situation. So if it was an accident report, something has happened, we would talk about who was involved, what happened, where, when, how, and why it happened. That's the sort of information you would put into your main body. Articles, something that does come up in exams quite often, follows that IPPPC structure. So the orange boxes that you can see on the screen, that's your introduction, paragraphs, and conclusion that we see in every piece of writing that we do. There are a couple of added extras though that we would expect to see, including a heading, so a title of some kind to tell us what the article is about. And you can use those subheadings, those small little titles that you can see, the yellow boxes there, to help give your reader an understanding of what that section is talking about. So small titles relating to that little chunk, if you like. You can put the author's name. That's quite typical in an article, and it might come here at the top under the heading or right at the bottom. Your choice. We would also potentially be asked to look at reviews. We did reviews last week and we talked about them a little bit in the 5 a day. So as you know, we need a heading, we need the name of the author, and we need a rating. Those are some of the key parts that we need as added extras on top of our introduction, paragraphs, and conclusion structure. But in fact, those paragraphs, there is a little bit more of a guideline that you can use to help structure what you write, because we tend to follow this pattern in that the first paragraph of our review tends to talk about the positive aspects of whatever we're reviewing. The second paragraph tends to talk about the negative, so the bad bits that we encountered in whatever it is we review. And because it kind of follows on from that, we can then in the third paragraph talk about any suggestions or sort of improvements that we can give to the company or people about how they can move forward in the future. Okay. Last but not least, this is something that we did ever such a long time ago. This was back in the first couple of weeks. We have something called an internet discussion forum. And these are all about opinions. They will give you an example of what someone has said. So you need to imagine there's this discussion going on online, might be on social media or on a particular website, and this person has put up their views on a topic. They won't give you loads of information, so they won't write perhaps more than a paragraph or two, because if they say it all, there's nothing left for you to say. What you need to do, you need to imagine you are the second or even the third person in this conversation, and you are going to add your views as well. It will be a contentious topic usually, so there's more than one side of the argument that you can work with. My best suggestion is that you follow the layout given in the example. It can vary slightly, but there are some key features that we would expect to see, such as the post subject. That's the heading effectively. That's like a subject line. And you're carrying on the same conversation. So use the same subject line that they have used. They tend to put when it was posted online, so we might get a date and time. You should do that too. Remember, they might not give you loads of information in the middle, but when you write, you should be writing in paragraphs and separating your points and ideas clearly. You can respond back to the first person. You can talk to them almost directly if you like and say whether you agree or disagree with them and why. At the end of your writing, it is often something that we do is to put our name and potentially where we are from. But these are generalized. We would only put the first name and a general idea for online safety purposes. Okay, we don't want people to be able to track us down on social media and so on. So my best suggestion, guys, look at the layout, look for these parts that you see here in the example in the task and mimic and follow their layout, because that's the layout you should be using. Okay. So to get you thinking about that, the last thing that I'm going to get you to do quiz-wise, let's just stop sharing. If we go back to your document with the links in, this quiz here, the Kahoot challenge, that is going to get you thinking all about layout, all about the sort of different types of structures and text that we've just talked about. So have a go at that for me. And then, oh, hang on. Bear with me, guys. Okay. So once you've had a go at that quiz for me, guys, there is a writing task, and this is in the folder on Learn as well. And you can do it. It will be in your class notebook, so you can always access your notebook and type it straight in there for your tutor. Have a look through the task. You need to think very carefully. Who am I writing to? Who is my audience? What is my purpose? What is my reason for writing to them? Is it a formal situation or an informal situation? Because that will affect the kind of language that you are going to use. What am I writing? Am I writing a letter, an article, an email? Because that will then affect the layout as well. So when you read through your task, you need to think very carefully, pick out that kind of information to help you gather your ideas and write your text. And as always, they do give you some lovely bullet points. Okay, let me just pick out here. They give you some lovely bullet points here to help you organise what you want to say. Okay, so remember, look through, look carefully, write an email. That's what I'm doing, so that will affect my layout. To the security team, well, that's my audience, isn't it? It might be more than one person that sees it, but it's still going to be quite a small group of people. So that will affect sort of the language that I use. Is this a formal situation or an informal situation? Probably formal, because although I may have met these people, I probably don't know them very well, and I probably don't know their personal names or anything. So it is probably more formal. What is my purpose? I'm giving my views, I'm explaining. So I'm being quite informative, aren't I? I'm sharing opinions. And again, this is going to affect the sorts of things I talk about. So now over to you guys. Have a go at the writing task if you've got time and pass that on to your tutors. There are lots of other activities on Learn that you can use to help you revise for reading and writing. Entirely up to you. Some hints and tips for you for your writing exam. Make sure you read the question properly. We just looked at a quick example there. Make sure that you are picking out those key things to do with purpose, audience, language, and layout. You can make a plan, you can make notes, or even write bullet points of what you want to talk about in each section or paragraph. There may be key spellings given in the task. So if you've got the name of a person or a place or any technical language, use the spelling that they give you in the task information. Remember to use that IPPPC structure we talked about. You can use more paragraphs than this, but this is sort of the general format to follow. And make sure you leave some time for proofreading at the end. Don't just click submit or click end at your exam. Take that time, proofread your work for all the key things that we really focused on today, such as your full stops, your capital letters, and building up that structure with the commas in the middle. At level 1, we are looking for around 200 to 250 words for task 1 and 150 to 200 words for task 2. So you get 60 minutes, but we're going to need to spend slightly longer on the first task because it is worth slightly more marks. So I would suggest around 35 minutes on task 1, including proofreading time, and 25 minutes on task 2. Okay, question 1 is worth slightly more marks out of the 2, so this is a good reason to spend more time on it. That is in fact the same for level 2 as well. So let's reflect. Go back to your starter quiz that you did. Have a look at those red, amber and green ratings. Have a think about your skills. Think about what we've talked about today. Do you feel like you've improved? Do you feel like you've picked up some new information to help you? Do you feel like the quizzes have helped you to build up those proofreading skills? Have a look through and consider if there are any areas you still want a bit of revision on. Remember, there are plenty of activities on Learn to help you do this. Pick one area and set yourself a target. Make sure you revise for that, ready for your assessments next week. Thank you very